My name is Catalina Concha Ormsby. I work with Dr. Chavez and at the University of Michigan at the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I just have a few announcements before we get started, and then we will promptly start. So I want to tell you that for a more inclusive experience, we're providing a QR code at the entrance of the room, and this will allow access to captions from your phone, or if you want, we'll also have the screen here displayed. And please note that we have gender-neutral restrooms on the third floor, East Wing. And those are most of the announcements. After this panel, we'll have a small break, and then we will be ready for the lecture. Save your seats, because we expect a larger audience for the lecture, and we also will have overflow rooms on the sides, where everything is also being live streamed. So we have people watching the panels also virtually. So to get started, I will pass the mic to our Chief Diversity Officer and Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion, Dr. Tavi Chavez.
Good afternoon. Okay, good. The lunch is settling in, you know. For this award, I mean, one of the things for those of you who know James Jackson or knew James Jackson and know of his legacy, which is probably everyone, you know, and if not, we'll make sure that, you know, we correct that, that if he had only contributed through his research, you know, we would be having these accolades for him, and he would be internationally known as he is, and he would have made contributions to the fundamental way that we study Black people, the contributions he's made not only to psychology, but to health, you know, public health, medicine, to many areas of social science, but it's not all. This award and the legacy of James Jackson is about the excellence and intellectual leadership and community leadership as a scholar, but also the way that that was reflected in the ways that he used his role, positionality, and influenced not only local academia here, but also more broadly. So he was the director of the Center for Afro-American and African Studies, which is the USAID Center, CAS, now it's known as DAS, because he was instrumental in moving a center to become a department here in one of our departments in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. Many of you may know about his, whoops, I'm dropping my things, his visionary leadership of the Institute for Social Research. Clearly, many of you know, from a scholarly perspective, him leading and creating the first nationally representative study of Black people, but the program for research on Black Americans became a program and a unit that became, nationally and internationally renowned, not just as an intellectual leadership space, but as a space of programmatic change. So training scholars, engaging scholars at all stages, and promoting the work of this research across many different areas. So the earlier question that came up about, how are we using research to impact the real lives of our communities was something that James Jackson did not only in his scholarship, but then in the way that he advanced his leadership role, being involved, again, in all spheres of community-based research to being on just about any national committee that you can think of that's related to health equity and health disparities. And this award really is about that legacy. Similarly, this panel aims to spotlight the enduring impact of someone whose legacy has also reflected not only the contributions of scholarship that you heard about earlier, but also someone who is strategic in thinking about using scholarship, one's role, positionality, building community, building capacity, of supporting empowerment of our communities to make change. So we will explore Dr. Robert Sellers' leadership roles and administrative vision, drawing on examples from outstanding scholars and professionals. As was noted, Rob's work extends beyond theoretical and empirical research and has inspired leaders across various disciplines in fostering the growth of influential change agents among his mentees and scholars in the field. We will talk about some significant contributions directly and indirectly in the administrative and leadership space, not only formal administration, but other forms of leadership as well. And we will showcase perspectives from mentees, former mentees, colleagues, and collaborators, as well as those inspired by his visionary leadership. So I will ask this wonderful panel to come up and sit beside me while we have this conversation. And then I'm going to move. Sit where you would like, because you're going to introduce yourself. Ha ha. Participant moderator, but I'm going to mostly be a moderator to start with, because I would like to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves, what you are in your current work and role, and then provide, us with a little bit of a history of your specific connection to Rob as a leader, and, some connection that it has made to the way that you think about your leadership approach and work, directly or indirectly. So it could be, I'll start with you, to my right, Dr. Coakley.
All right. How are we doing today? All right, excellent. Well, I'm Kevin Coakley, and I am relatively new to this wonderful Michigan community. I am a professor of psychology and the University of Diversity Social Transformation professor and the associate chair for diversity initiatives and space management. I'll say more about that in a moment. But first of all, I just want to say, Rob, congratulations. You are so deserving of these accolades. And just as a quick aside, many of you who know about my professional trajectory probably know that the University of Michigan was always a dream for me. I've been a professor now for 26 years, and I've been at several different institutions. But I would often engage in a conversation with my spouse, and we would talk about if there were any place that you could work at, where would that place be? And it was always the University of Michigan. And as I reflect on why that was the case, it was in large part due to, obviously, the wonderful work of so many scholars here, but particularly the influence of Rob and what he has done and what he has built here. And so Rob, I want to thank you for everything that you have done, for inspiring me and for influencing me in the direction of my work and for helping to get us here. So should we sort of delve right into the questions, or should I allow my colleagues to introduce themselves first?
Yeah. And then allow your colleagues, and then we'll look back.
All right, go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Figure out if that was weak or not. Let's try that again. It was weak, right?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. I'm channeling my inner Rob because my grandfather was a pastor, much like Robert's dad was. I'm Jackie Matisse. I met Rob in 1990 in the summer when he was transitioning into the world of real people, and I was starting as a graduate student here at the University of Michigan. And I'll say this just as a sort of, I'll sort of mention the work that I do. I'm currently the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Rutgers University in Newark. And I will credit much of both that journey into leadership and the journey into that role to Rob and the ways in which you cultivated in me things I didn't know that I was interested in. Because I quit my job every Tuesday, I'm not sure I'm interested in it all the time. So I won't blame you on Tuesday, but the other 6 days of the week when I feel like there's some possibility for doing some good things, it's because of that. I will say that the first moment that I met you was not a leadership moment in and of itself, but was a leadership moment in principle, because it was the place where I got to know who you are. the summer of 1990, I don't know if you remember this, the summer of 1990, as I was coming in, another person was coming in, Jill Allen, and it was a difficult moment for her because like she had a living situation that had fallen apart. And Jill and I ran into each other on the street, and she was telling me what was going on, and so she said she's gonna call Rob. And I saw her the following day, and she said, solved. Rob found me a place. I'm staying with him. It was a personal moment, but it was a moment where I learned what it means to show up for people. And it's one of the many things that I most love about you. It is one of the things that I most respect in you, and it's one of the ways in which your leadership has really transformed me. So that's my beginning of a leadership moment, again, always connected to relationship because that is who you are. So I'll pass it to Stephanie.
Thank you. So, on? Yes, okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Is that we? Yes. It's after lunch. It's wonderful to be here. So congratulations to Rob for this incredibly well-deserved award. It has been so amazing and gratifying to see everyone come back and talk about what Rob has meant to them. And it is certainly a privilege to be here today to talk about my own journey. So I'm Stephanie Rowley. I'm the Dean of the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia. Where's Mia? Oahu, which is where it all started with the OG Sellers Lab, right? So when I think about my kind of leadership journey with Rob, it comes in 3 phases. So the first phase, kind of like what Jackie is saying, was really my first understanding of who Rob was, not as a friend or as a colleague even, but as an intellectual. So that was when I was an undergrad. So I was an undergrad here at Michigan. Rob was a grad student. Mind you, I didn't know the man. So this is an interesting story. But I was on a search committee. And that search committee to find the new director of CAS, the Center for Afro-American African Studies. For whatever bizarre reason, as an undergrad, I was on a search committee. And we had 8 different candidates for this job. And so I had to go to 8 different talks and try to keep up and understand what was happening. And there was this guy who sat on the front row of every single talk. And you can imagine, you remember the yellow legal pads, and he would be writing things furiously with his brow knit. And then he always asked the first question in 8 of these things. So I didn't know who he was, but he certainly made an impression on me. Fast forward, probably 2 years later, I was interviewing for grad school at UVA, and I went to UVA to meet all the faculty. Rob was one of the faculty there. Interestingly enough, it was Jackie's birthday. So I've never told you. Have I told you? No. Because he picked me up at the airport or something and said, "I'm sorry, we should be talking, but it's my friend Jackie's birthday, and I need to send her flowers." So the first thing that I did with Rob Sellers was to buy flowers for his friend. It's an interesting world when Rob is at the center of that world. But anyway, that stood out to me as an intellectual. When I realized that Rob was that guy, as we talked during my visit, I realized that he's got, just an intellectual giant, that he wants to show up intellectually in all of these places and learn and grow and push and ask hard questions. So that's phase 1. When I was an undergrad, he was a grad student. Second, obviously, was when we were at UVA. As Mia pointed out, those hours in the sunroom, building the MIBI and engaging in all the ways. And really, Rob is a leader, I didn't realize it at the time, but he's like 30-something and an assistant professor, and just shaping that world in ways that are still apparent even today. And then the third phase, of course, was when I came here as a faculty member back to Michigan. Rob was on the faculty. Like Jackie, he saw something and said, "Hey, I need you to be the associate chair for DEI and space," which is we're going to say some things about that. And so, and that really started my journey, my love for leadership, and just understanding the opportunity that you have as a person to be in the room and to really affect change in institutions. And so, grateful to be here.
Good afternoon, Rob.
Dude, I know,
So
we're
you
like,
all had an effect. So, very glad to be here to celebrate my longtime friend and colleague, Rob Sellers. We've known each other for 4 decades, maybe. And some of the stories about you being positioned as a graduate student with an undergrad. You were an undergrad at Howard as I was entering into that graduate program there. We overlapped for about a year, had many, even at Howard, stimulating conversations, have kept up over the years in a variety of ways. We were reminiscing just briefly about some of those instances. The early days of you being back here as a faculty member, you taking me to meet James and colleagues as a way of kind of helping to share a mental model about possibility, which I think was important, both in terms of grounding and establishing legacy that we were to take up together and understanding our positionality in doing so. We've also interacted around the Black empirical and understanding of the Michigan Mafia and what that meant and the benefits and the limitations of that framing and how that framing needs to be extended. Here as a faculty member, faculty colleague, but also working with you and under you over in the Vice Provost's office, launching Wolverine Pathways, as well as CISBIC, the Center for the Study of Black Youth in Context. So all of those various opportunities to be both a participant and an observer of the tremendous leadership, both intellectual, spiritual, I would say, in many respects, relational, and the sacrifices that I know were pivotal to you being able to team build, because a lot of this is about that, creating a vision, growing and deploying a network of people to help to enact that. It's tremendous work, and I think you're certainly the best in the country in terms of doing that kind of work. And so as we continue the conversation, it's just important to give you your verbal flowers for all the things that you've done over the years for me, as well as for everybody in this room.
I'm going to keep us going, but I have a question for you, Dr. Coakley, but it's not related to your title, so I want you to talk about your title first, and then I have a follow-up question for you.
So I mentioned that my current title is the Associate Chair for Diversity Initiatives and Space Management. Now, I haven't spoken to my predecessors who were in the same role, and so I don't know the history. But let me just say this, that I was very excited to be given the mantle of being placed in this role for diversity initiatives. I was a department chair at the University of Texas at Austin, and I had indicated that I was interested in pursuing additional leadership opportunities. And so when this opportunity was presented to me, I was very grateful. But there was something strange. Why would the word space management attach to Associate Chair for Diversity Initiatives? And Rob, I don't know that we actually ever had an explicit conversation, but knowing you the way that I think I know you, I knew that there had to be a strategic reason for that. And my guess is, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but my guess is that given the politics of space in the academy and issues around equity, that Rob geniusly sort of thought that, we need to make sure that individuals who are going to be in this position have the opportunity to influence the allocation of space in equitable ways. And what better sort of way to sort of assign responsibility than to the Associate Chair for Diversity Initiatives. And so, again, I've never spoken with Rob, but my sense is that was probably what led to the coupling of such seemingly disparate responsibilities. So.
Dr. Rowley, do you whatever?
I concur, and I would say that that space really is the biggest equity, or one of the bigger equity issues in a department, especially in psychology. Yes.
I would just do the quote that because people are probably more willing to give up their firstborn child in space in the department. And so, part of the genius of this was that, well, if they don't want to listen to me about DEI, they're going to care about their space. And so it was also a way of leveraging influence and, when this was a new role in the department, the associate chair for DEI too. So just appreciate, what things that did not seem to go together went together really well. Now, Dr. Coakley, we talked a little bit about, and I know you've talked about how important it is to extend scholarship beyond the theoretical and empirical, important in this space, to tackling critical social issues. Everyone on this panel is a noted scholar and has a track record in some way for engaging in public-focused initiatives and public scholarship initiatives. But I'm sure you face the dual pressures of fulfilling the traditional requirements of academia and engaging in scholarship that will engage and impact the broader public. So I wanted to know from your perspective, could you reflect on the importance of public scholarship, including at this particular moment in history, for current and future faculty in the room, including early career scholars, and that might include the challenges related to that area or the kinds of things that we need to do as institutions to support this.
Yeah, thank you. So let me take you back to when I was a young assistant professor at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And as I was putting together my promotion and tenure dossier, one of the things that you're asked to do is to sort of be forward thinking. So what is it that you want to do? Where do you see your sort of career going and unfolding? And at that time, I was really enamored of what has been referred to as so-called public intellectuals. I remember, watching, CNN, MSNBC, and other media outlets, and you would always see folks like, Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, Bell Hooks, et cetera. And I thought to myself, wow, that looks pretty cool. I could see myself engaging in some form of public scholarship. And I remember sort of writing that in my as a part of my tenure dossier. So fast forward many years, I get promoted and tenured. I go to several different institutions, and then I ended up at the University of Texas at Austin. And I had the opportunity to go through training by an entity called the Op-Ed Project. And if you're familiar with the Op-Ed Project, this is a sort of a group that trains professors. You're trained by professional journalists, and you're trained to sort of learn how to take your research and to sort of communicate it in ways that are accessible to the public. And so I went through a year-long training along with 19 other individuals who were part of the inaugural cohort. And I finally got to live out my dream of writing publicly and engaging in public scholarship. And I was so excited. I think that first year, the year that I went through the training, I think I ended up writing about 10 op-eds in 1 year, which is because I was ecstatic to be able to finally live my dream. And since that time, I found myself, writing on virtually every major issue that we've had experienced in this country around race. I've written about police brutality. I wrote a number of op-eds. In fact, I wrote so many op-eds about police brutality that I stopped writing them because there was nothing else that I could say that I had not already said. I wrote about racial disparities in school discipline. I wrote about the Black Lives Matter movement. I wrote about critical race theory debates. Wrote about affirmative action. Most recently, I've written about the attacks on DEI and specifically diversity, the use of diversity statements. And part of why this is so important to me is that, I believe firmly, and I think Rob shares this vision, that the work that we do should have implications beyond the confines of the academy, that we want to make a real difference in the world that we live in. And part of what that means is when you put yourself out there in the form of public scholarship, you need to be prepared for the incoming. Because as faculty, we are public figures. You know, we are pretty easily accessible to folks who might want to communicate with you if you say something that they disagree with. And so given the topics that I have written about, I have received a lot of really extremely vitriolic and problematic emails. Just to share just a couple of examples, when I wrote about critical race theory, and it was published in USA Today, and it was an invited contribution, I remember the very next morning after it was published and opening my email and seeing, you know, an email with one word. It was the N word written about 160, 170 times. I know because I counted each time that it was written, because I was like, someone actually took the time to write this and send this to me because they were unhappy with the op-ed that I wrote. I've received emails where someone challenged me to a fight, and because the particular individual was a part of the military, he told me that it would not work out too well for me if I were to take up his challenge. I had emails that started to mention my family members, and for and that's when it crosses a line. And my spouse has always been very weary of me sort of writing emails, writing op-eds where I mention family, because you don't know who's out there, you don't know what they are likely to do. So I say all this to say that when you engage in public scholarship, you need to be prepared to take on some very, very negative and problematic and potentially dangerous folks. And so, but Rob's leadership and what Rob has sort of said about the importance of not just being in the ivory tower continues to inspire me and inspire my understanding of the importance of going beyond writing for journals and writing for academic audiences and engaging in work that helps to move the conversations that we're having nationally around issues along race.
Thank you, Dr. Coakley. I'm going to direct my next question to Dr. Matisse or Mattis, depending on where you live. It's a joke about what names Jackie answers to. Darren Walker, who is the outgoing president of the Ford Foundation, recently authored an essay called "There is No Leadership Without Risk." And he writes, "Leadership is an action, not a title. And many of our leaders are paralyzed by broken, perverse incentives that impair the abilities to fulfill institutional missions and mandates. To be sure, some argue that leaders should stay in their respective lanes, better not to risk offending one constituency or another, especially with a policy or perspective that might be construed as political. Sometimes discretion is well advised and appropriate, but courageous, moral leadership demands more, because it challenges us to recognize that bringing light is often worth enduring the heat, especially in moments of profound challenge for our democracy, our communities, and our world." And first, before I will go into the rest of the question prompt, is that you are such a leader. In all the ways that I have seen you show up over the years, in ways that people have seen and people have not seen, when I think about courageous, moral, integrity-based leadership. And I would say our honoree, it's the same way. We just heard from Dr. Rowley that as a graduate student, he was showing up and not afraid to speak his mind, even from way back then. And we recognize that now higher education is facing numerous challenges related to pressures on leaders about how they speak and show up. I'd love to hear your perspective on courageous moral leadership, particularly in this moment, and even the types of things that you have had to navigate as a leader currently, certainly.
Get the easy question.
Right.
So I think the first part of what your question evokes for me is James Baldwin's phrase, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." And recognizing that part of leadership for me, and this is something, again, that I have learned over and over again from Rob, and particularly in times when he doesn't know that I'm looking and that others are looking. you have to figure out who you're answerable to. And for me, I'm a person of faith. I'm also a person who loves my family. I think of myself as answerable to my mother and to the things that she tried to instill in us. And so the moral compass for me has to be not who signs my check, but who at the end of the day raised me. I'm also a person of faith. And so I have to think about God as the ultimate entity that I answer to. So I can find another job. I can't find another spirit, and I can't find another heart. So for me, the fundamental issue is I can't give up. I can't lie. I can't pretend. I can't be weak and do the performative stuff, because at the end of the day, when you trade your spirit, you can't get it back. Like, that's not how that economy works. So that's a start point. When we talk about courage, I think people love the Disney version of courage, right? Where there's something going on and there's background music and the person makes a decision and everybody supports it, and then the credits roll and everything is good. But that's not how life works, not how the academy works. So part of, for me, this moment is recognizing that when you know something is right, you gotta say it, you gotta do it, you gotta stand up for it, and you gotta know that, you gotta do that knowing that the people who are also in leadership around you are they're gonna fail, right? And there are moments when you're gonna fail too, but it is the hardest parts of leadership for me are parts where there are people who are in leadership above you who will not stand up for you in moments when you are trying to do the right thing, even when they will support it behind closed doors, right? And that kind of weakness is deadly. The folks who will say, I'm so glad you said that. But it's like, you were in the room too, why didn't you say something? Or people who will say something in front of the mic, but then when things get a little rocky, they'll turn on you or they won't speak up. Like that you're never leading alone. And so being able to be in a space where you make the conscious decision that you know it's right because you were raised right, and you have to trust in how you were raised. You know it's right because your faith tells you it is right, because it's not about you. And that's one of the things I remember, like Rob says over and over again, it is not about you. Your education's not about you. Your position is not about you. And so if you are trusted to, in a way that people put you in a position to do something good, it is never about you. So you have to make decisions because you recognize that 2 generations down the line, or someplace on your campus, or someplace in the context where you do or don't operate, there's somebody who's going to need somebody to do the right thing, and you've got to be that person. And so for me, the moral leadership is recognizing that. And I'll just end with this. There's an allegory that runs through my head a lot, and it's an allegory about an old man who, you're not the old man in this allegory. You kind of are. But it's an allegory about an old man who day after day gets up and he's planting seeds, and it's different kinds of seeds. And there are these kids around him who are watching him, and after a while they're like, why are you doing this? Like, this has been years and all you got are saplings. You will never eat from the trees that you are planting. And this man turns around to them and without judgment says, you and I have been eating from trees we did not plant all our lives. That's our responsibility, right? That's what leadership, moral leadership for me is, and it's one of the things I'm deeply, deeply grateful to you, Rob, for reinforcing and modeling in so many ways.
So my next question is, wow, you said it in the order, didn't even know it. To Dr. Rowley. When Dr. Sellers designed and launched the first U of M DEI strategic planning process, building inclusive and equitable academic environments for student, staff, and faculty success was a critical element of the work. As you think about this moment in our history when it feels like divisions in our campuses and communities are deep and long, and when civil dialogue and debate seem to be even more unusual than usual, I guess as a multi-layered educational person in higher ed, a leader of an education school, a leader in a state that is having some interestingness also with regard to thinking about how we talk about, teach about, and work on these issues. What do you think that we need to be doing to create more inclusive environments through the work that we're doing here as leaders? What skills do we need to impart on students so that they can be leaders in this space as well? So just your musings.
A thing that I feel really passionate about, so I love that this was my question, because when I look around, what I see among smart and well-meaning people is this deep fear of, as Daryl Wout this morning was talking about, either being misinterpreted or of offending someone else. And I think that that has allowed us in lots of ways to be even more siloed. So I have to say that Dr. Sellers is literally the most inclusive leader I have ever worked with. And again, this is across 3 phases of my life. This is basically my entire adult life. I have been studying his example. So I think it's interesting you started out with the development of the DEI work. Again, one of those moments when he probably thought I wasn't paying attention. So I want to say that the sequence was that the provost called him and said, hey, can you do a thing, this study of the university? I don't know how this came about, but can you study the university and help us to understand student, faculty, and staff experiences and how we might think about diversity and equity and inclusion? And so Rob did what he does, which is he started a study. Which means that he set up these working groups and focus groups and surveys and collected all of the data, of course, and then wrote what I call the Sellers Report, which was something I still actually will pull out today and look at. And really at the heart of that report that came out of that, what was like a year of study, was a blueprint for inclusion. It also talked about diversity and equity, but it was really a blueprint for inclusion. So I think the first thing we have to do as leaders is gather the data. We need to understand where we are. We're doing a whole lot of cute stuff that feels good, book clubs and workshops and all of these things. But at the bottom of it all, we need to understand who we are and what people's experiences are, and to be able to see people for who they are. And so there were some interesting nuggets that came out of that. So as one example was some of our students of color and low-income students were living in Detroit or in Ypsilanti. And so then faculty were doing these group projects where you had to be on campus. And so those students were left out. There were a bunch of examples about, small group work in classrooms. There was a hefty section on the experiences of staff. Where are we talking about staff in terms of DEI work, and really thinking about how their experiences play out and how that affects our community? And so first thing is, as leaders, I think being able to see other people is really critical. So one of my favorite stories, and this was really a defining experience for me. So I was associate chair for DEI in space. Rob was chair, and trying to look around the room, see who's here. So we had a particularly curmudgeonly faculty member. Curmudgeon. And just cantankerous. And I was watching as Rob would continue to invite this person in for consultation, for all kinds of things, and I could see how much Rob was respecting this person, and I was like, help me understand. He's a fly in the ointment. He's just a difficult person. And Rob said to me, but look at him and listen to him. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, he means well. He wants the best for other people. And, at the end of the day, he was willing to advocate for people in all kinds of ways that we didn't see. So what we saw showing up was this kind of cantankerous kind of figure. But what Rob saw was, in some ways, what Rob saw was a soldier in the army of his plans to bring a department together. What I heard in that is that as a leader, my job is to see every single person, no matter what they look like on the outside, which is not some namby-pamby, but for real. And so that was a lesson that I take with me. The other thing is, part of the writing down the questions and the sort of intellectual approach of being present in every talk was really an intellectual curiosity and humility. So when I asked Rob, what do you write? Because we used to ask him, like, what do you write on those little yellow pads? He would have these stacks of yellow legal pads that, what are you writing? Well, sometimes it's like the grocery list, but sometimes it is, it is trying to engage with other people's ideas. And he told me that he knows every single talk he goes into, he knows that he can come up with a cogent question that will contribute to the conversation and help him to learn something new. So what that tells me about inclusion, right, is that every space that we enter, we have an opportunity to learn. And if we look at other people not as people to learn from, but people to teach, then we're missing the boat. And so here, again, intellectual giant who enters every moment looking for an opportunity to learn from others. And so to me, what we need to teach students is that idea of critical thinking. Because when we start to dehumanize other people, part of it is because our thinking is narrow and inflexible. And so if we imagine that every interaction that we have with anybody could lead to some learning, then we would treat them differently. We also have to think about this, the humility, the openness to new ideas, the value for data, because part of this is also just wanting to learn and to be better and then to apply those learnings in new contexts. And, I appreciate that oftentimes the context that where Rob was applying this was in the support of Black students, but you can see that the vision and the genius of the whole thing was so much broader. And I wish that we could bring that to the classroom and to our students right now, because I think it's sorely missing.
Talks from each of our, with substance, thank you. And so my next question continues with Dr. Jagers. Even during your time at U of M, U of M has been a place that has played a huge role nationally in leading institutional diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And as we were just alluding to in the side conversation before, not just at U of M, but nationally, that there's work that, even before we were calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that seeks to support access, those who are marginalized coming to the table and being a part of the institution, and progress that we have been seeing and who gets to have access is coming under attack increasingly. Even recently at U of M, we had a major news outlet characterize our work with what I would call kindly as a politically motivated hit piece. And so, but to give people their proper respect, that the game has been organized and successful in messaging things like CRT to DEI, and just letters that without like having people think about what we mean and what we don't mean and why these things are a threat. What can we as scholar leaders do, not only those of us who engage in scholarship on these topics, but also for the fight for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice? What should we be doing to organize and push back against these very organized, well-orchestrated forces, well-funded forces? And what can, and that might be at the individual level, but also what should we be doing as a higher ed community, and in higher ed, not only people at universities, but people who are interested in using knowledge and evidence to make impact? So that was a mouthful, but we've talked about it.
a couple of thoughts on that. I think one of the things that my good friend understood early on is that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. Which captures, I made an earlier comment about team building, and we've talked about the kinds of excellence that you insist on in colleagues and those who we nurture to come along as part of a pipeline. You said something to me at one point about building the work in such a way that it becomes institutionalized and almost impossible to undo. I think that type of strategy, well, and also that we have an epoch in which we're operating. There are people who came before, there are people who came behind. There have been ebbs and flows of this, what we're experiencing now, so it's not new. So institution building and almost by definition, building individuals to stand on the work that has been done and seek out opportunities to expand the work are some of the ways in which you have to move, given the fact that it is in fact an ongoing kind of cyclical process that we are experiencing now, but can understand as a process that occurs over time. The genius of you finding your position in the ultimate kind of collective vision that has been crafted at University of Michigan meant that in the short run there'd be the institutional resources and the precedent to actually do the kind of work that you have been able to take up and lead. So those kinds of efforts, the degree to which they can be replicated, I think buffer us from the onslaught, but then also prepare us for the next generation of work. The various things that we have alluded to, the Black Grad, which flowed from the Black Empirical, the SISBIC, which always had a training component associated with it, Wolverine Pathways, et cetera, are all intended, in my view, to prepare that next generation to continue to take up the work. And for us to then to stand on it long enough for them to become positioned well enough to replace us, because ultimately it's a marathon that is a relay. And so you and your wisdom have been attempting to hand off the baton for a minute, but we keep insisting that you keep running. But our collective effort, even reflecting back on the recent Black Grad, the invitation for younger folks, mid-career and early senior folks to step up and step in is you in particular, but us collectively playing our position in beating back some of this inevitable smoke that comes when you make progress. Because you don't get smoke when you're not making progress. You get smoke when progress is being made and being noticed. And so we have to be conscious of the fact that it's inevitable. That contestation will be part of our reality. But what is it that we do to steel ourselves as individuals and also institutionalize it in a way that allows some shelter, right, from the storm, some way to have moments of kind of checking in with one another, because we all face different aspects of the work. I remember when I left to go to work at Castle, part of our conversation was, yeah, same battle, different front. Always knowing that I could always come back to the mothership to get restored and then go back out and do the thing. So I think we're in an epic. It appears dire. It's been worse. It could be better, but our job is to continue to struggle in a way that models how to be with one another and with others who may appear to be our opposition, but who sometimes just don't know any better. And to move the agenda such that our young people continue to pursue excellence and thrive.
You wanted to add a comment, Dr. Coakley?
Yeah, I wanted to share a memory of Rob that has really influenced my leadership style. So you probably know that Rob has had many leadership positions, and one of his leadership positions was as president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Culture, Ethnicity, and Race, otherwise known as Division 45 within the American Psychological Association. And when I think about Rob's style and sort of like what drives him, two phrases come to mind. He challenges the status quo, and he speaks truth to power. And it doesn't matter what the context is, it doesn't matter whom the audience is. These are guiding principles that I think are characteristic of Rob's leadership. And so, as president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Culture, Ethnicity, and Race, each president has an initiative, has a theme that kind of marks or defines their presidency. And so during Rob's presidency, and if you know Rob, you know that Rob's about institution building. He's about sort of creating and establishing legacy. And so Rob's presidential theme was quite ambitious. He wanted to create a research conference. Now, this was very different from previous themes that you saw from other presidents. And not to diminish any other themes, they were quite important, but they weren't about creating, institutions. And so Rob had this bold, audacious sort of initiative, and it was quite exciting. But the thing that many people probably are unaware of was that there was resistance. This Society for the Psychological Study of Culture, Ethnicity, and Race was a entity that was, primarily, or certainly heavily influenced by clinical and counseling influences, certainly very important. But the research component of it, needed to be improved. I think would be a nice way of putting it. And so I think Rob's vision was to add, some rigor to the sort of study of race, ethnicity, and culture, and to institutionalize it. And for those of us here, I would think that we would understand why that's so important. But unfortunately, there were some folks who were who were quite resistant to that idea. And I know Rob knows this, but I think part of the sort of the mentality was, who does he think he is? This is the way that we have been doing this for years. We've been, in their minds, quite fine in doing things the way we've done it. We don't need to have a research conference. We've been fine as we have been doing things. And Rob shut out the noise. And if you know Rob, you know that he can be somewhat obstinate. And I say that lovingly. I say that very, very lovingly. Once Rob has his mind made up, you will not deter this man, because he has a vision and he knows what he wants to accomplish. And again, it's not about him. So I just wanted to add that has been a tremendous influence on my own leadership, because I understand that speaking truth to power, challenging the status quo, and understanding that it's not about me, it's about the vision that we have for the people whom we are serving. And that has been a defining hallmark of Rob's leadership. And I just wanted to share that.
Can I add one other piece? Of course. I would just add that it is his inclusive leadership style that allows that kind of thing to happen. So first of all, we could give 100 different examples of times when Rob said, this is really what the right thing, and really stood by that in the face of opposition. But it is because people have so much respect for him as a human, and they understand that he is fair and equitable in his approach to everything, that he is honest and filled with integrity, that then they will say, okay, I'm not sure about this, but we're gonna go with it. And there are so many examples, Black Student Psychological Association. When we were at UVA, how many? 18 Black graduate students. That has never happened since Robert Sellers was at the University of Virginia in the psychology department, because he helped people to understand how to do admissions. He helped people to understand how to, as Enrique was saying, how to think about great future students and things like that. And so that institution building alongside inclusive and humane leadership is just such a rare combination that has really, you saw the faces of the transformed field that has been, that is the outcome of that.
And so, I mean, many of you may know, but some of the institution building that our colleagues just alluded to, like when Rob mentioned Black Grad, the Black Graduate Conference in Psychology, there's another national conference on Black graduate students in higher education, the Division 45 conference. Rob likes to watch the History Channel, ESPN, and then also I think we need to start another national conference. I was just thinking, I'm thinking about something to eat for dinner. And just thinking, but always thinking about something that's, there's individual mentoring, which you heard a lot about too, but, along with the individual mentoring, how can other people, since we can't yet clone one person, how can there be structures so that large numbers of people have opportunities to engage in rigorous research at a national level on issues of culture and ethnicity and race, regardless of what institution they're coming from? Can they build networks with other scholars who are doing that? Can we engage in cutting edge training around research and methods and translation of that we're providing for students, postdocs, early career faculty in a way that doesn't just rely on them having the luck of the draw and having to know someone, but broader access there too. So I wanted to, each person was giving a reference to that type of institutional building, which is kind of a side hobby of Rob's, but really just a way of thinking about leadership and capacity building so that things that start here go beyond what is here, and the seeds, the trees that we're eating from, others will be eating from trees that they didn't have to plant as well. I guess I want to, as we move toward wrapping up this before we get to some of your questions, also talk about advice that you would give to future leaders around surviving and thriving in leadership roles. So this is a panel of Black leaders. The work that we heard this morning about the psychological lives and experiences, just the snippets of Black people, probably can be very instructive in this moment, generally around things that are happening. But when you look at leaders, in educationally related positions, from our Black college presidents to leaders in all types of levels and spheres, that their particular challenges and attacks and pressures in those spaces, expectations of leaders that may not be expected of others too, claims of being called DEI hires, because of your identities rather than the extensive CVs that each of you have around your experiences of scholarship and practice and action. But at the same time, if folks like you were not in these roles, stuff would be worser. And that is the technical word for it. So what advice do you have so that we are passing that baton to others, so knowing that the work is not easy, but that you can survive and thrive? Anyone, this is for anyone.
I guess one of the things that has been pointed out here, and I think is, essential to my good friend, is a sense of integrity. Because if you don't stand for something, you go for anything. And ever since I've known him, he's been clear on the responsibilities that must be assumed in order to advance the collective good, right? The collective well-being. And so if you stand on that, then the sacrifice and the associated discipline, the drive for excellence for yourself and others become second nature. And then the assumption of responsibilities so you can learn how to do the tough work of organization building. So, it's not a mistake that you sat close to James Jackson, you sat close to James Jones, the McAdoos, Boykin, Franklins, et cetera, to learn from them how to do the work in addition to the statistics class, the extra statistics classes that you would take, so that excellence is second nature, both in the core work, the coin of the realm for academics, but then also how to translate that, because without that core work, there's no respect, there's no et cetera in the profession. And so moving into Division 45 or institutional roles, you had the credibility and the integrity and the skill set and the vision and the team building in order to help move the agenda along. So, those would be things, and they're not easy, they're not simple, they're complex, they're hard. You have to be able to withstand it, and you need people around you to be support systems, as it, can be lonely if you're in the room and you're the only, right? You got to have a place where you can say, well, damn, or to reconsider or re-strategize, et cetera. So thought partnership becomes an important thing, but the people have to be trusted and themselves have substance and excellence so that the feedback is sound and is always about collective well-being.
Well, and I would say the interesting thing, one of the big lessons from Rob, for me, has been this tension between the very seriousness of the work. Like, we don't play because we understand that the stakes are high and that there are real people on the other side. And so there was always a seriousness and an urgency to the work that we were doing. At the same time, there was an ethic of frivolity from time to time, and a belief that we couldn't do the work if we didn't take time off to enjoy each other. And so we often talked about the work hard, play hard, and the work smarter, not harder principle of the work. And so those two things were always in conversation. And so I think that's critical, and really the piece about building community. So if you think about everyone who's up here, we have traveled with Rob across so many different aspects of our journey, and that is because we are connected on a level because we're so committed to the work that we do and to one another. And so we are the community that we draw from in those moments when there's smoke, so to speak. We have the community.
I'll echo the same points. One of the things I've always respected about how Rob moves, Rob carries his posse with him everywhere. And all of us ended up at Michigan because Rob was like, posse. I need more posse around me. I wasn't looking for a job, and Rob was like, you looking for a job? I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, just come give a talk. And before you know it, you're on faculty. So I think that posse building, but also knowing that the posse that you build around you is ready to do the work at midnight, ready to play spades. Now, I can't play spades, but I can talk junk. And so I realized that it's half the battle. Like, if you can talk smack and you can show up at a spades table, You can make it. But the other thing I think is really important for future leaders to know, get the skills. There are actually real skills attached to leadership. And participating in the American Council of Education training, HERS training, there's lots of training out there so that you can get the foundational skills in the same way that you would do as a researcher. Those foundational skills have to be there. So that in combination with having a posse around you and making sure that you bring people close to you who you know you can genuinely count on, but be that person who can be counted on as well. And then to the last point is the thing that has been said here again and again. It's about not initiatives, but building structures. So play the long game. And I think leadership is about not the fluff and performativity of shiny things, which it is for a lot of people, but it is about the quiet stuff that's done in the evening that is about making sure that you have the kind of structures that cannot be dismantled easily because it's transgenerational and it's in people, not in a place. So it's got to be portable.
You know, the cool thing about hearing these remarks is that there's a lot of interrated reliability. Because they pretty much said what I was going to say. I'm looking at my notes here. Maintain a network of close friends and confidants whom you can turn to for advice and support, especially when times are rough. They didn't see my notes. But that's true. And, when we came to the University of Michigan, we had a sense that we were coming to something that was tremendously special, that was, historic, that we were entering a family. And we have to credit, there are many people who are responsible for that. Certainly a lot of that credit, can be attributed to Rob and his legacy and what he has built here. The other piece of advice I would give, and Rob, I want you to hear this because I don't know how much you do this, because I used to sort of make fun of when I would hear my graduate students talk about self-care, I used to sort of just diminish that. I'll be honest. Whenever I would hear the word self-care from my graduate students, I translated that to, okay, this is another generation. Like my generation didn't talk about self-care. It was about the work. It was hard. We didn't expect sympathy. We just did the work. That was just sort of like in my generation. But as I've gotten older, I've developed a better sense of appreciation for self-care, both physical and mental and spiritual. And whatever forms of self-care you need to nourish you, I think our current leaders certainly need it in the midst of all the attacks. I think future leaders need to make sure that they engage in that. And Rob, I would say to you specifically, engage in self-care. And I would start by understanding what real barbecue is. Once you understand what real barbecue is, that will go a long way for you to kind of engage in like appropriate self-care. So I'll stop there.
Yes. Spirit of the earlier comment about Rob's obstinance and ability to argue once he decides. There was yesterday a discussion about barbecue that led to broader discussions about faith and the like too, and
Because pork and God go together.
Exactly. He would make that connection. So we have a little bit of time. I want to make sure that we get, if there are a couple of audience questions, that we're able to get to them for the panel, motivated by their, yes, we have a question right over here. Let's see if the mic is coming to you, Christian.
So my question is like kind of a double whammy. So if you can like kind of choose if you want, you don't have to answer all of them. So firstly, I want to ask, and you all kind of touched on this, but I want to talk more about specifically in a research kind of landscape. So how to navigate a pitiless, unforgiving, and seemingly backwards time-traveling academic world as a young Black woman academic, and how do you keep that passion while keeping your roots in your self-complexity? And also, how do you think neutrality affects DEI work in the academic landscape?
Easy questions for the panel.
My esteemed colleagues.
Neutrality is not a thing.
Thank you.
Not a thing. It is not. So kind of working backwards, I think being really clear about the narrative game playing that people engage in to distract you from the things that you've got to do. When people sort of invent these lexicons of foolishness, we have to be very careful about the balance point between engaging with people around those things and doing, I don't know if, like, you may be too young to have remembered the Roadrunner, but so one of the geniuses of the Roadrunner is while the coyote was busy kind of creating this fight, the Roadrunner stepped out and did his thing, right? I think there's a certain extent to which you don't argue with people who are not interested in a dialogue, they're interested in distracting, right? Because you'll never get light from something that has no source of illumination. So step away from that because it's not useful, which gets to the first part for me. I think remembering that Rob Jagers has said it, I think a lot of us have said it, what we're going through is not new. And this is also not the worst moment humanity has ever seen, right? It's the same game, different era, different geography. Keeping in mind that people have sacrificed for you to do real things in the world because it is not about you. It is about the work that is being done in you, through you, around you to get you to the next generation who needs you. Recognizing that the next generation needs your excellence and arguing with people who are not interested in illumination can only lead to exhaustion and mediocrity. Do not waste your time. Do the work that is intended for you to do and know that there are people around you who will show up for you in every circumstance. We will fight battles for you behind the scenes that you will never know that are being fought because you don't need to know that, right? And you will do that for the next generation. Be about your game, but know that you got to get rest because rested soldiers do better work. But know that we are counting on you to actually stay on game because anything else is about losing the battle, right? I saw a t-shirt that said, "Do not argue with people who Sojourner would have shot," right? I'm gonna leave you with that.
Can't begin to ask the question as sophisticated as that young lady over there, so I'll just make a comment. I happen to know Rob when he was a boy in Cincinnati. And when Jackie was talking about the old man who was both thankful that he was eating from trees that others had planted and also planting trees for the future, it reminded me that Robert had a father and a mother who were movers and shakers in Cincinnati. In fact, there's a scholarship and fellowship named after his mother in Cincinnati, and his father was a well-known preacher. And I just want to say that I bet they would be very proud of the man you have become.
Hello, all. I am Natasha Johnson. I'm currently on the tenure track, third year. I started at CISPIC when I was just out of Spelman, so 2012, and have been mentored by almost everyone on that panel in some way, and just genuinely, deeply grateful for you all, for your presence, for your energy, for allowing us to see ourselves before we knew what we wanted to do. So my question is, it's like, I feel like I'm older now, right? I've grown up, I'm ready for the conversation. So the question is like, what do we need to do to prepare for the baton passing? And Jackie, I know you mentioned like there's so many battles that you all fight on our behalf with love and with care and with vigor. And it's good that we don't know about those things because it was not meant for us to know. So I'm at this developmental period. It's like, okay, mom, dad, brother, sister, aunties, cousins, godmothers, godparents. Like, I don't know if this is the time to have the conversation, but I am wondering, like, whatever you think is good to share, like, what do we need to do at this level to be prepared for the baton passing because there was a lot of protection of not knowing all the things that was going on behind the scenes.
I don't actually have an answer to the question, so I'll just answer anyway. Yeah, because so I was at a dissertation defense proposal defense a couple weeks ago, and the student was using the MIBI, and she said to me, "Did you imagine 30 years ago, right, that people would still be using the MIBI, or that you were building something that was that would have this impact on the field?" And my answer was both yes and no. So we did have a sense that we were doing something big and that it was serious work and that we had an obligation to other people who weren't in the room to do the work that we were doing, and to carry that projector around so we could do PowerPoint and demonstrate our excellence. And yet, I don't think any of us I certainly never imagined I would be here. I never imagined I'd be a dean. I never imagined that I would still be traveling with these same friends 30 years later with the type of intimacy that we have as friends and colleagues. And so, so I think both things are true. I think, to understand the seriousness of your position and the privilege that comes with, the tremendous privilege to be well prepared, to be in a tenure track job at a top institution, to be imbued with the intelligence that you have and the power that you have a seat at the table, I think, is really your responsibility, and the rest of it will come along. One more thing that I learned from Rob, though, is that we each play a position. So, when I looked at the CISBIC group, we each had a little role, and we could probably tell you, we never voiced the roles, but we could tell you what they were. But you have to know what your position is and what your mission is and your vision and where you're headed and the thing that you want to make a difference in, because we can't do all the things. And so I think being excellent in whatever your space is, and then understanding that you have, Nkemka down the road and you have Amber across the country, and that there's this network that can fill in the other positions. So I don't think you have to, but I do think you have to understand the seriousness of your position.
The only thing that I would add to that, because I'm just thinking about, some of the sentiments both beginning in this morning's panel to this panel about being on your game and being excellent in your work and your position. So if you're in academia, then there's a currency that comes with, being excellent as a scholar, and some of the legitimacy that, we talked about with Rob is both based on his character and integrity, but also his pure intellectual excellence and brilliance. And so you're cultivating that as a part of your work. I would just say one of the things and being confident in it, which I hope in the training and the mentoring that you got from various people in the room, that's one of the things that you came away with. I will just say, and I often tell the two Robs, a story at some of our early, I think it might have been an early Black Grad conference, but and Jager's, I don't know if he believes me when I say that one of the things I remember the most from earlier in grad school is, as a new grad student, didn't have a lot of family history with people who had gone to grad school, reading literature that was mischaracterizing Black children and families, and Jager's, and this is part of the collaboration of work with Rob, or the Robs, as I call them, it's if it doesn't actually describe your communities and families, then it's incomplete. There's nothing, it's inaccurate. And so it allowed me to say that I, as a graduate student, could question. It made me a question asker versus I'm just reading to be able to answer a question or tell you what the theory says. It allowed me to really think about my position as a more active agent and creator in that space too. And I think that confidence about not only knowing the things we talked about, knowing what we want, but knowing the mechanisms that it takes to get there is something that will serve you well as a scholar, but it will serve you just as well in this kind of strategy that we're talking about here too. And so the other thing, Natasha, I don't want you to worry about, I mean, as I told you yesterday, you're doing the stuff that you're supposed to be doing right now, and being excellent and being engaged and being a great mentor. What happened to all of us probably, and maybe we didn't even realize it when it was happening, is we got called on, you know, Rob is like, hey, you want to be on this committee to do X and Y and Z? One of the things that we're trying to institutionalize here at Michigan, that is a part of the things that Rob has done with these different types of structures, is make sure that we don't have scholars who think like, I have to wait till I get tenure to be a change agent, that you can be a change agent at a career stage appropriate way, that you can still meet the demands of your discipline and field, but you can observe what's happening in your department. You can become involved. You can ask questions, which is a critical currency. Why do we do things like that? And sometimes that can actually lead to, you know, the novice version of that is often one of my most powerful tools. And so I would just say, you know, keep the path, but also know that because you have this community, that you are being supported and making sure that you are thinking about how to play your position at every single developmental stage, even when you don't know it, you know, too. So just making sure that you're listening for those opportunities that, you know, to do things in your role that don't take you away from your scholarly work and your disciplinary demands, but that might be a part of contributing to a community, whether it's a conference or whether it's another type of initiative or activity too. I mean, that's one of the goods of building this community, is that we're trying to make sure that we're creating capacity for people to play their positions in every role at every career stage, because this work can't just start when people get senior and the like too. They have to be building the skills, but they also, we don't have enough of us in the academy to wait until everyone is senior to be making change.
And Natasha, if I could add one more thing, I would encourage you and all sort of junior scholars to talk to those who came before you, to talk to those who have been in the trenches, who have been engaged in these battles. I know that part of what the message that we perhaps gave was that we have tried to protect you from so many of the fights and challenges that we face, but I do think that it's important for you to be aware, for all junior scholars to be aware of what we and scholars who have come before us, the fights that we have engaged in, because we need to be passing down. We don't need to be recreating the wheel. And so sometimes you might be experiencing things that you think, this has never happened before, no one has ever experienced this, but if you were to talk with people who came before you, you would see that there's nothing new under the sun, that these things are cyclical, and we benefit from the passing down of knowledge and experiences from generation to generation. So I would encourage all junior scholars to talk with those who came before so that we can benefit from the knowledge that has been transferred. So.
We are at our closing time, so please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. For highlighting the skills, the integrity, and the commitments and the challenges that come into these leadership roles. But what I hope they did was to talk about it in a way that made it all accessible to all of you. That, you know, there are particular types of leaders, but the message is, how do we as a community work in ways to build capacity, to work strategically, and to work so that everyone has a position and role in the work. And so Rob is, you know, an exemplar model of that, and my panelists are exemplar models of that as well. Thank you.
Can I say one thing? Rob Sellers said to me something that I found to be profound. You have not because you ask not, which I haven't heard said in the time I'm here. That to me has a profundity to it that I think is worth sitting in for a minute. That making a demand based on your knowledge of your own worth is an essential part of stepping up into adulthood, but also in this profession, right? So never doubt your worth, and don't be afraid to question or to ask for the resources, for the time, for et cetera, that you might find to be essential to becoming excellent.